All right, we're here with Molly Patrick, Clean Food, Dirty Girl. What a title, huh?
That's me.
Where did that come from, though? Clean Food, Dirty Girl. The kind of is funny to have kind of the contrast with that.
It is a contrast, right? Yeah. And that's why I kind of like it, because it is a little bit unexpected, but I should have asked if I could if I should
you
keep
could
this.
swear.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
Let it rip, Molly.
Okay. So yeah, it's funny. I used to talk like a sailor. Like I used to have just a big potty mouth. And I think I've changed a lot over the past decades, right? Who hasn't really?
Yeah.
But I used to talk, I just used to swear all the time. And I used to do a lot of things that I don't do now. I still swear. Like a brilliantly placed fuck is beautiful to me.
It's amazing.
Right? It's amazing. Like it can make all the difference. But when I first started Clean Food Dirty Girl, we weren't called Clean Food Dirty Girl. We were called something else. It was really boring and whatever. But when I was deciding on a new name, it was one of those just lightning bolt moments where the name just kind of hit me, and I was like, this is kind of us. And Clean Food, it's not so it's not so much if you're not eating our food, it's dirty. It's it's more of the contrast between Clean Food, Dirty Girl. And it's more of my whole brand is just not taking ourselves too seriously and embracing imperfections. So it's sort of an overarching theme of the brand rather than a literal, a literal kind of sense of it. But it was really that okay, well, the food that we offer and the recipes and my background is in plant-based eating. And then I also tend to cuss. So you put the two together and it's Clean Food, Dirty Girl. And it just kind of stuck, right? It's kind of sticky and it kind of stuck. So that's where we're at. And I don't swear as much anymore. Not because I had an issue with it. It just I have kind of evolved, and my writing has actually gotten better over the years. And so I tend that I don't it's more for a nicely placed curse word instead of my writing being scattered with it. Right. So yeah.
What do you think the difference was back then, why you were doing that as much then?
In my writing?
Yeah.
I just wasn't as good of a writer, I don't think. And, I would get that feedback a lot. People would email me and be like, I really like your recipes. I like what you do, but I don't like your language. And it's clear that you just aren't a very good writer and you're just using that as a crutch. And at the time I was like, that's bullshit. You're just being a hater, whatever. And as I look back, I'm like, I really have become a better writer. And I actually am not trying to not use sweary, dirty language. It's just sort of the evolution of my writing. And I can see now, there was some truth to that actually, but I wasn't able to see that at the time.
Yeah. It's sometimes hard to see when you're in it currently, when you're doing it, and somebody from the outside tells you, and it's like, well, maybe I should evaluate this on some level,
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, I was just really defensive about it because ultimately there probably was some truth to it. And I just, I was new to all of this and my writing was sort of the last of my worries because I was starting this online business and I didn't have a backup plan. And I kind of just went all in with this, not knowing anything about it. So it was, it's where I was at. And it was a beautiful thing,
Yeah, most definitely. Well, take me through, I'm curious. You've had a very interesting life growing up, it seems like. And I'm also curious, as well as you talk about plant-based has become very popular. So let's go back in time. We got the in time music. It's going backwards. We're going backwards. Molly Patrick in the beginning, New Mexico, right?
Yep. New Mexico. Grew up. I mean, the plant-based world has changed a lot. And I can tell you firsthand because I've actually never eaten meat my whole life.
Which is incredible, by the way. That's incredible.
Yeah, I guess so. I haven't met too many people like me. I have met a few people who've never eaten meat, but I never really thought it was incredible. But when I think that it's not as common, right? To have that story. Exactly. But my parents were hippies and they settled in New Mexico, bought a bunch of land and started to build their house. And while they were building our house, they bought a teepee from a good friend and we all lived in a teepee for a while. Then we kind of lived in a little fifth wheel trailer for a while out on the land. We had an outhouse. We didn't have, they literally just bought a piece of land. And so, and there wasn't a lot of money to put it in plumbing and do all the fancy things. It was just very, very basic. So it was a lot of living outside. We had an outside kitchen. My mom grew food. It was really basic food, but really healthy food, right?
Yeah.
Grains and beans and veggies, and basically it's what I do now.
Right.
And like I said, an outhouse, no like hot water, no indoor plumbing for a long time. So it was very, very basic. I didn't know that it was uncommon. I thought that's just kind of how it was. My best friend who lived in the land over from me, she was living in a school bus, or her parents lived in a school bus while they were building their house. So I thought it was all very like, this is just how people live. Yeah.
Like, this is normal, like, and what was your like first interaction outside of that environment where you're like, oh, people live differently than me?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was like when I started to go to sleepovers or go to, like go to a friend's house to play. And I had this one friend, they were sisters, and I went over to their house, and it was, probably a very like normal, modest size house, but I thought it was incredible. I thought it was so luxurious because it had a bathroom, like inside,
Exactly.
like that flushed, like they have like a shower that's inside that has hot water. I was like, this is amazing. And I started to think, whoa, okay, this is not like how I am growing up, is not kind of the norm. And I want that. Like, I want a hot shower. I want to not like go outside to the outhouse at night if I have to go to the bathroom, like, so that was kind of, it was just through friend's house and, how they were living. And I thought, man, this is, it was the first time I thought anything like that it was an issue, because the whole time growing up, it was actually fine. Right. I didn't have any complaints about it, but I didn't have anything to compare it to.
Do you think that's often what happens with people with food, is they grow up or they have an experience with eating that they don't have any other comparison to, and that shapes how they feel about food?
Yeah, totally. It's our worldview, right? It's how we grow up and what we're taught and what's modeled to us. And I think that can extend to a lot of things, and I think that is one reason why, when people are looking at their diet, if they're eating a standard American diet and they're looking at changing that, that adjustment period can be rough in the beginning because it's so foreign and it's what they've always known. And so there's this like not only emotional, emotions wrapped up in it, but there's also like the actual addiction part of it, right? What happens in the brain with all of the chemicals, but it's also like a societal thing, and it's what they were taught. So I think that it is. I mean, it can be a complex thing. It doesn't have to be, but I think that for most people, it starts that way.
Yeah, most definitely. And with plant-based, I'm sure you're seeing that it feels like there is much more acceptance of a plant-based approach to eating, becoming more common. How has that changed from when you were growing up to now? Like, take me through maybe some of the kind of iterations of that,
Oh yeah. Like growing up, I was so weird. I mean, it was very, very strange to not eat meat. I mean, just even at, I would always have my lunches packed because, all the food at the cafeteria or at school was like meat stuff. And not only did we not eat meat in my household, but also it was all very healthy food. Right. And you can not eat meat and have unhealthy food. Right. So there's kind of a distinction.
That's true. A lot of people don't think about it that way.
Right. But like my mom always bought like sprouted bread and like tahini or almond butter on sandwiches with like berries. So we didn't have like a lot of sugar in the house. So it was always very like homemade, very crunchy granola kind of hippie health food. And oh yeah, like I would definitely get like stares and be really like, poked fun at and stuff. And even going out, like my school was by a McDonald's. And so there was a group of friends that would like leave school to go to McDonald's for lunch. And everybody would order burgers, and I was like, I don't want that. So I ordered, like, I went up to the counter and I was like, hey, I want a hamburger, but with no burger. And it was like a 10-minute ordeal. Like they had to
Really?
call the manager. They're like, well, I can't do it because I don't have the button for that. I don't even understand what that is. Like, it was so weird. And I'm like this 10-year-old, like, I just want the bread and the cheese and the mayo and the lettuce. I just don't want the hamburger. It's not that big of a deal. But it was like I mean, all of a sudden there was like 5 or 6 people around the counter trying,
Oh my
or, you know, the
goodness.
register trying to figure it out. And so, you know, I have that very vivid memory. And I think now to, like, you know, fast food chains rolling out like vegan stuff. And I think it's become much more the norm and expected and accepted as well. So I've seen a huge change, going from not being cool at all to being kind of a, you know, a thing that's very not popular, to like, oh yeah, this is cool, I want to try it. So there's been a
Yeah.
huge shift, and it didn't happen overnight. You know, I've seen it incrementally happen over the years.
What have those increments been, you think, in your mind, that have gotten us to this point?
Yeah, so I think that documentaries, like the documentaries
Mhm.
that came out, like Forks Over Knives coming out, and I think it was what, 2010 or 11.
Yeah.
Like, I think that sort of like started this new wave, and on the backs of that there were you know, other documentaries made. And then of course Game Changers, I think, was another like big push. So I think
Mhm.
those documentaries had a lot to do with it. And also, you know, there is that thing of like the, you know, people in Hollywood trying to go plant-based, like that
Sure.
does like do something for it, right? That does get people's attention. So there's been kind of that, but then there's also been this, I think there's always like that tipping point, right? When you
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
seeing, you know, before I started Clean Food Dirty Girl, I was in the restaurant business, and I opened vegan restaurants. And you know, at the time it was like, you either ate at a vegan restaurant or you ate at a restaurant and you ordered a salad. Like, for a long time, like regular restaurants that weren't vegan wouldn't have like specific
That's right.
vegan options on the menu, right? It was like, I'll take a salad with no bacon and no blue cheese dressing and no
Yeah.
like cheddar cheese
I
on
remember
top.
that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. So kind of the slow introduction of like, okay, now we have these like quote unquote normal restaurants, but, you know, having a plant-based section or a, you know, whatever vegan section. So it's been really interesting to watch. It's been great to watch, you know, and to also kind of then like be a part of it in some small way too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when something is, well, for lack of a better word, is kind of on a fringe for a
Yeah.
long time, and then you start seeing that fringe element start moving into the mainstream. But I
Yeah.
feel like
That's a
there's
good
all,
word. Yeah. That's a
yeah,
good
and
word.
I feel like it's also kind of like when there's something becomes fringe or it becomes mainstream, there's also kind of a other side that kicks. And so I've seen a lot of people who are now are promoting like a carnivore diet for
Yeah.
that. And tell me, I'm curious because I feel like plant-based and carnivore are like rising at the same time. What are your thoughts about that? You know,
Yeah, I don't know. There's always going to be something, you know, and I
you
think that
know,
you're right. I mean, I think that if you have the spotlight on this one thing that's getting a lot of attention, it's like all of a sudden you're right. It's going to like bring up these other things.
yeah,
And it's sort of like that idea that when you eat sort of a standard American diet, nobody talks to you about nutrition, and you
right,
go plant-based and all of a sudden everybody's talking to you about nutrition. It's like this, huh? But you know, the carnivore diet, sure, you know, if that's what people want to do, okay. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't suggest it, but I think
yeah,
that we're always going to have these kind of trends and these trendy diets. And the thing about a plant-based diet is it's like, it's not a trend. And I think
yeah,
that because of the like or not success, but the popularity it's having right now, people who haven't been in that world can kind of see it as like, oh, well, this is a trend because now I'm just seeing it everywhere. Right. But it's really like, this is actually a very basic way to eat. And it's
yeah,
like very simple. This is not a trend. This has been happening for, you know, well, thousands and thousands and thousands
hmm,
of years,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and I
all,
think specifically with like the whole food plant-based, right, versus the vegan, because there is a difference. And people who are new to this, I think sometimes those words can be used interchangeably when
yeah.
really they're not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education with it as well with it, but it's always kind of like when something rises, something else rises.
Yeah.
It feels like, which almost feels like it's diametrically opposed to it on some other side. And
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like we're in a weird we're kind of like in a weird good direction with food. It feels like it's like, oh, we're getting there, like we're getting better, like, and then it's just like it's just such a weird industry, food in general,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
yeah, I think that you're right. And um I think that we're getting there. And I also think that there's just more awareness now. And I think
Yeah,
that awareness is a good thing, but I also think that it's important for each of us to take responsibility for educating ourselves and for really, figuring out what is what and not relying on, you know, just clickbait and the
yeah,
whatever who and who said, like, do your research and find out really like what it is, right? So yeah, I mean, I think there's more awareness and there's more talk about it, and so therefore there's more opportunity to learn about it and to make choices, whereas before there wasn't a lot of awareness. So it just sort of, there was these like you said, these crazy fringy people who are just out
yeah,
here, and then everybody else.
yeah. It's hard because like I talk to my wife about this stuff all the time because I think she's been into this like forever. And I said, was it hard growing up in like central Pennsylvania and like you're into something that literally no one else is in? And then you watch other people get into it. She's like, it is hard because you're swimming upstream your entire life, it feels like. And
Yeah.
everybody thinks you're crazy. You know, like,
Yeah, but the funny thing is, like, for me, and I get that. Like, I definitely feel that. My
yeah,
whole family that wasn't, like my parents. So like my grandparents, for example, or my, aunts and uncles and extended family, they always thought like my mom was very much she kind of like dropped out of being a housewife and sort of like burnt her bra and moved to the
yeah.
mountains and sort of went against. So automatically she was like the one in the family that's very, very different.
Hmm.
And going to visit my grandparents, yeah, you would think like that I was an alien. Like they just did not understand me. And it was very, but it's weird because I never saw myself like that. And I
Mm,
don't know if that's a testament to how I was raised and really raised in a way that's like, your worth is not dependent on what people think of you. Like you're
yeah.
already worthy and whole as a person. And you just, I don't know if it was that or just, I don't know, but I never really felt like the outsider weird one. I just thought, well, this is just how I eat.
Yeah.
That's
Well, what influenced your mom? Like, if she had parents that were not similar to her, what was her
mm.
influencing deal?
So she grew up, she, every time she would eat meat, she would get horrible stomach
Mm,
pain, and she was really forced a lot of meat growing up. My grandfather like was a butcher, or my grandfather's dad was a butcher, and so they had a butcher shop, so there was a lot of meat, and they were also like in the grocery store business, and so there was a lot of meat growing up, and that was sort of like the status, and that was what you did. And so not eating meat for her wasn't an option, but it always made her sick. And so when she kind of went out on her own, she was like, oh, I don't have to eat this anymore, because it just made her feel better.
right.
And then like that was sort of like the diet piece, and she was vegetarian then from, pretty much from the time she left home, and she kind of knew about that, even though it was very, very strange. And then in the 90s she had a gallbladder attack, and they were going to like remove her gallbladder, and she asked the doctor like, okay, well, if I remove my gallbladder, like what you know what's going to do that job of the gallbladder? Like what
Yeah.
am I taxing? What other parts of my
Right.
body and organs am I taxing if I remove that? The doctor was like, well, there's actually a way that you don't have to, and you could consider like changing your diet, right? And going totally plant-based and doing really low fat. And so she did that, and her gallbladder has been great ever since. And she like dropped 30 pounds, and she got, really super healthy. And the only fat she would have occasionally would be like avocado and nuts, and really focusing on whole plant food. So that really shifted for her, like going from vegetarian to like totally like whole food plant-based. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of her evolution. And then of course I had that as a model, right, growing up. But she, I think that her whole thing with going outside of society and the norm stemmed from her inability to pretend she was happy being a housewife and not
Mm,
working and not having a career, right? And
yeah.
she didn't, she wanted to work and to contribute, and she didn't want that white picket fence life. And so she just had the balls to say fuck it, I'm doing
Right.
something different, even though nobody else was doing that at the time. And she was not allowing the consequences of that with like her family, like the fallout of that, to
Mhm.
stop her from doing it.
Yeah. And which I imagine at that time period must have been extremely, extremely different. And maybe it wasn't difficult, but I would think to a lot of people would be pretty difficult to go against the tide of that time period, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was in some ways, but I think just like anything, I think that staying where she was going to be more difficult because she
Yeah.
was like, she was really depressed and she was like, it just wasn't, she just was in a horrible spot mentally. And so I think for her, it kind of saved her life. And so it
Hmm.
was, yeah, it was more difficult to stay than it was to change for her. And I think a lot of people actually like get to that point, and that's really what tips them over the edge, right? And I see that a lot in our community, and a lot of people
Hmm.
changing their diet is like, okay, I kind of have this desire to change, but I'm not uncomfortable enough yet to do it. And
Yeah.
once once the discomfort of staying in the same lane of what they're doing day in and day out gets, more uncomfortable than changing, that's when it happens. There's a beautiful quote from Anais Nin about that, and I don't know it exactly, but it's that same idea, right?
Yeah, most definitely. It's so what's the resistance? Have you encountered any real resistance to discussing plant-based approaches to people who are maybe vehemently opposed to it? Or are you talking to anybody like that?
Yeah, I mean, I just always come at it from the mind of like, I'm not here to convince anyone. Like, I'm not here to convince.
Yeah.
I'm not here to change people. I'm here if people get curious and have questions and want to try something, then I'm totally here. But I totally respect and am, I'm totally loving everybody regardless of what they eat. So
Yeah.
I don't have a mission to change. And I don't think that trying to convince somebody ever works because people are gonna make the change when they are ready. And I know that
Right.
I'll never be the reason why somebody changes. I might have some good recipes and I might give some direction and I might be sort of a support for people when they're ready, but like I'm never the reason for somebody's like
Yeah.
change and success or their inability to change and ultimately not succeeded, whatever. So I don't hold that responsibility. And so with that, I just, I'm open to whoever comes our way wanting more information and I'm happy to give it. But getting in debates and trying to convince and change
Yeah.
people, like that's just not my jam.
Yeah. I feel very similar about that. So where do you see, obviously we're on this track where it feels like plant-based approaches to food is becoming more popular. It's more mainstream. Where do you see it going as we continue moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's so if I could think of it going a lot of different ways and who really knows, right?
Hmm.
I could see the plant-based world getting as processed and almost maybe not as destructive, but becoming pretty destructive, right? In the
Hmm.
production
Okay.
of feeding masses with processed and possibly like engineered food, right? Like I could see the potential for some like, oh, what's going on over there? That could get kind of scary and but I could also see, I can see a world in which a lot more people are like just growing their own food and making their own food, right? I
Yeah.
know that's not realistic for a lot of people, like growing your own food, right? That's like kind of, it's great if you can do that, but a lot of people
Hmm.
can't do that. I see it, realistically, I just see it being a lot more available in the mainstream and probably because of that, not as like healthy as it could be, but hey, probably healthier than a meat heavy diet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
I've been reading some books. I can't remember. This is one book. It's really well done. It's like sex robots and vegan something. And I crushed it. I'm not a big book reader, but I destroyed this book because I was like, this is pretty cool. And it was talking, this lady, she basically went around to all these companies who are making like meat essentially in laboratory from cultures of animals. And it feels like there may be a future where we're trying to get away from, factory farming on
Mhm.
maybe not anytime soon, but it feels like that we're again like we're in this weird winding path of like we want to do good, like we want to, but we're struggling to let go of the past
Yeah.
of how things have been. Do you see that a little bit or?
Yeah, I think as a whole, I think that as a society and as individuals, I think we're always kind of looking to our past to see what's possible for the
Yeah.
future. And I think that that's always going to be limiting because that's only going to get us where we're at right now. And so looking to the future to see what's possible is like, has so many more options.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, oh my God, how amazing it would be to get rid of factory farming altogether. I
Oh
mean,
my
what
gosh,
an
it'd be incredible.
amazing, it'd be for so many reasons. And I think, so that's why I'm really focused on like, okay, the individual, like not changing people, not convincing people, but like what support do people need? Like what beliefs do people need to look at to evolve and to like expand their capacity for nourishing their body? Like what are the beliefs that are stopping them from doing that? What are the thoughts that they have that are stopping them from doing that? And so looking at that is like very fascinating for me,
Yeah.
right? To see like at the individual level, like what is that, and how can we like provide support for people to see that, oh, there might be a different way, and it's not dependent on my past and what I'm like attached to, but it's like looking at what's possible for my future, both as like the society and the health of the planet and everything else, but also for my personal health and well-being and how I show up for my life every day. So I'm really interested in that like belief thoughts piece right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very fascinating, and kind of expanding on that. What do you see as the most common limiting factors for people that they want in their change opportunity?
So what comes up a lot, there's a few things, but one that I see that's very common is people are uncomfortable making this change if their family isn't on board. So that holds people back a lot. Like, okay, my husband, my wife, my kids don't want to do it. They're not eating this way. And so therefore, like, I can't prioritize this for myself, or I'm unwilling, or I'm not going to, it's too hard. So that piece is really big. Like my family's not going to do it, so therefore I can't. Another piece that I see is the sort of all or nothing mentality. Like if I can't do it 100%, I'm just not going to do it at all. And I'm just going to go back to how it was, and not allowing any room for like, okay, well, can it be a little of this and a little of that in the beginning, and just kind of exploring and getting curious about the process instead of having this belief that there is a perfect way to do it. Right.
Yeah.
So that's sort of another one. Another one might be just like, you know, my friends and my workplace and the people around me aren't familiar with this. So feeling very like isolated and alone in the process, and not feeling like they have support, and having this misunderstanding that we don't change because who we have in our life, like that can add something to it, but we ultimately have to be the one doing it. Right.
Yeah.
So not feeling supported from their like community can be another one. And then there's things like just, you know, the straight up addiction that people have to food. Right. That can be another one that's and the unwillingness or not being aware of what it takes to make changes is to feel your feelings. So not being willing to feel your feelings when you're going through this process is another big one too. But, you know, because we have this amazing community, I do see this stuff come up, and it is pretty fascinating. But I think that there's a lot of people willing, and there's a lot of people wanting it. And there's a lot of people trying. It's just sort of like going back to that idea that there is this one perfect way, and as soon as they do it like that, everything is going to be fine, and having this thought that as soon as I do this, then my life's going to be perfect. Because life is never perfect, regardless of how you're eating.
I'm going to eat amazing and be amazing everywhere else in my life, right?
Right. And then you're reaching this goal and you're eating plant-based, and you probably feel better physically, but also then you're going to have a day that sucks. And it's like, well, wait, life wasn't supposed to suck after I reached this goal. It's like, no, life is always going to suck. Sometimes, sometimes.
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of like, I'm interested in your take on this, because a lot of people, the word health, people, well, this person's healthy. And often when people refer to that, they refer to like food and like physical fitness based health, not knowing that that word encompasses so much more than that. So if somebody comes to you with like, oh, I want to be healthy, how do you talk to them about that term?
Yeah. So I think that's an all-encompassing term. I've seen people who are quote unquote healthy. They have their labs would be good. Any doctor would
Mhm.
tell them you're in good health. Their body has, energy, and they can do their day-to-day stuff, but they are like completely stressed out and beating themselves up if they're not being perfect. One time they have birthday cake and it's like they are waging a war against themselves.
Yeah.
So that, right? Like, it's almost like looking at the mind, body, soul, like, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, physical health is one thing, but then I don't know, it's almost like, how's your mental hygiene?
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
how are you thinking about yourself? Right? Are you showing up in love for yourself and for the people around you? Like, um, are you being gentle and compassionate with yourself to take life kind of as it comes, and have some humor about it? So I think my whole thing is like helping people eat more plants while celebrating human imperfection. That's really like my
Mhm.
thing. And so I think talking about more than just eating plants, it's why that for me, like, there has to be a bigger conversation, because it's not
Yeah.
just about eating plants, right? It's about the whole kind of collective, like, quote unquote health, and like, what is that, and what is that for the individual, because it's not really up for me to say either.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what's interesting too is often I've seen with food is, or let's say approach to food, that a lot of times it can be very sensitive for people because many people identify how they eat food as who they are as a person in many
Yeah.
ways. It's if they're a
Yeah.
vegan or
Yeah.
it's like that becomes their existence for
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I see that a lot too. And I don't, I think that it's an innocent thing though, because I think that most people
Yeah.
like don't know what, like, okay, well, who am I as a person? Like, that's a
Yeah.
pretty, I think for most people don't ask themselves that question. And when
Never.
you
They
really
never
start,
ask that question.
right, and when you start peeling back the layers on that, you really do look at it and be like, well, actually, who I am as a person is actually the thoughts that I have about myself and the beliefs
Mm,
that I have about myself. That's who I am as a person. Right. So identifying as like, I'm Molly and I'm vegan. Well, I'm Molly, but like, and I eat plant-based food, but I'm so much more than that.
yeah.
And my self is based in how I'm thinking about myself every day.
Yeah.
Right. That's all it is really.
Yeah, it's interesting too, is I think it kind of goes back to that fringe moving to mainstream. Like sometimes people think, hey, if I go into this, am I going to start like making my own clothes? Am I going to live? You know what I mean? And people think they're going to fall into this lifestyle that maybe they don't want.
The
You know,
gateway drug.
you
But
hear
what?
that?
It's funny. Yeah, I do. But like the funniest thing about that is that people think that like they just fall into a lifestyle as if they have no
Yeah.
agency over their choices, right? I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden I'm going to be living in a teepee, growing my own food and
Yeah.
not, like that doesn't just happen. Like
Right.
we have agency. We get to decide what we do. And so I think, okay, but I do see that like people are, okay, and maybe not so much anymore, but it used to be certainly like, okay, well, I'm kind of curious about going plant-based, but I don't want to grow out my armpit hair and become like this like hippie, right?
That's right.
And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, you don't have to do that ever if you don't want to. Like
Yeah.
I shave, and so you can
Yeah.
have your agency and decide how much you want to do of this. And more importantly, like, what is your why? Right? Why do you want to do this? If you really like your why, then that's a great place to start. And then you get to decide, well, do you want to go all in? Do you want to play around? Do you want to it's so up to the individual.
I think so. Definitely. Do you think that I talked to somebody else about this? I'm curious about this for you. Do you think that often, though, things come from fringe to mainstream because people who are not maybe doing those, what people may term more extreme lifestyle habits for that, are now getting into it? So if somebody who is not doing those things, getting a TP, and they're like, oh, that person seems more like me, it seems more relatable for them to get into it once it's adopted by people who maybe are not living in that
Yeah.
lifestyle some more.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think that people just want to be heard. They want to,
Yeah.
it's when you see a part of yourself in somebody else, I think that it disarms you a little bit.
Yes.
Right. And I think that but the interesting thing is, we're also like beautifully human
Mhm.
and we're also relatable, but it might be that you just don't know that part of that person that you might actually have something in common with, right? Because that part isn't shown, or you're not looking for that part, or you're making assumptions, or like whatever. So I think that, I think that when you can relate, or when you see something about somebody else, it's like, oh, I can kind of resonate with that. And usually it's like the human stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's that human stuff of being imperfect. It's like everybody has body odor sometimes. Everybody farts, everybody
That's
poops,
true.
like everybody like, has morning breath. Like it's all that stuff that we can all relate to. And that's why I like bringing that stuff up, like, and reminding people like we're all so beautifully human. And
Yeah.
let's start there. And see where it takes us.
I love that, because I think for a lot of years, I think our population of people sometimes tries to turn that off. It's like, well, I don't do those activities. I never fart and stuff. Like, sure you do. I mean, like, come on. And it's better to like just put it out there and be like, come on, this is like a common thing amongst people. Don't act like you're the one person that does it.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. And when you do, don't make it mean that you're like this horrible person. Like we're all, but I think that in so we can apply that in a lot of different ways too. Like my wife is not plant-based. And when we first started this company, it was like, I was like, I was nervous about her not being plant-based, because like, well, are there any other people out there who's doing something like this with a partner who's not plant-based? And maybe I shouldn't mention it. And I was like afraid of getting like judged and all that.
Yeah.
But what I really came to is like, this is the reality of it. I don't care that she's not plant-based. That is my truth. And I'm going to go forward with this and just be open about it, and be, because I think if I wasn't open about it, there'd be some sort of part of me that wasn't accepting about it. And I'm like, no, I'm accepting about this. And so therefore I don't care what other people think about that. Like they can have all of their own opinions and thoughts and beliefs and feelings about that. But by being open to like, in whatever it is, right? Being open to being human, or to like farting, or to, maybe just whatever, making choices that aren't supporting you in a moment. Like it's all okay, having a wife who's not plant-based when we have a plant-based company, like who cares? Like, but bringing it up and sort of like talking about it can bring a tremendous amount of like, okay, that's better to get it out there,
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what happens too, is people that, well, you're like this, so then everybody in your universe must also share these things with you, which is totally not human, actually.
No, it's not. It's definitely not human. It's not realistic, and it's not, and really good. Like I love my wife just for exactly how she is. I'm not trying to change her. If she wants to change, great, but it's not my job to change her, or anybody else. And I certainly like, I have friends who are plant-based. I have friends who aren't. I have, it's like, it's so eclectic and beautiful.
You ever have any discussions amongst people, even your wife, who are not plant-based? Is there where you're like, it's fun that I get to have people who are not like this, and we can have good discussion about it? And are people like, wow, I can't believe this, like that you guys are okay with this?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is, I mean, I've always found it really fascinating to be with people who are much different than myself, because there's so much to learn, right? About like culture. And my wife is from Malaysia originally, and awesome. she immigrated here when she was 30. And so being able to go back and like visit her family and like experience that culture has been amazing, because there's so much richness in the diversity, and we do. I mean, people do bring up like, how do you guys make it work? And I actually realized like a few years into the business that like, hey, this wasn't a liability. This was actually an asset, because now I can bring my experience to the table and share that with other people whose partner isn't plant-based, and how that can be totally fine. Right. So, yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing. Like actually, when you mentioned that your wife was not plant-based, like for me, it's like whatever. But there was a part of my brain that was like, "Oh, really?" Like I was catching myself for a second. I was like, "Really?" It's like, and it's so amazing. It's such a good thing, I think, in many ways. It's My wife and I are very similar, but very different in many ways. And we just accept that in each other,
Yeah. And I think that's what makes a strong relationship is like,
Yes.
just totally, understanding that when you love someone unconditional, it really is unconditional. And there can be like boundaries and really healthy debates.
Yeah.
And it's still in that like boundary or in that debate, there can still be a tremendous amount of love and acceptance for
Yeah.
each other. And so, yeah. And I will say too, like when I first met Luann, she didn't, she ate like, she would go out to eat all the time, and she eats a lot healthier now than she
Yeah.
did. And she eats, she's not plant-based, but she eats probably 90% plant-based because she eats what I cook. And I don't cook
Yeah.
meat because I wouldn't even know what to do with meat. And besides that, I'm not going to cook for separate meals because I got too much to do for that.
Yeah.
So, so she's learned a lot from me, and
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from her and like her culture and her upbringing and her beliefs. And it's just, yeah, it's really fun to get curious.
It is. And I feel like it's just such a great approach you have. It's one of the it's surprising. You never know what you're going to learn from people. That's why I love talking to people because, I've talked to many people who maybe have your approach, but maybe not the mindset that you have. And it's refreshing. It's good because you could take this approach to so many other aspects and topics in life. And like you said, those two words, healthy debate, that's something we need more.
Yeah.
More of.
It's funny because we have a private, and thank you for that. I hear that and I feel that, and I thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have a Facebook group with quite a lot of people in it. And over the weekend, there was a debate about oil. And people are asking, okay, why is there no oil in a whole food plant-based diet? Like I thought oil was healthy. And we had, and one thing in our group is like, you come join, you can eat however you want. Like you just can't be an asshole. That's like our number one rule. If you're an ass, like we don't have room for assholes, right? Yeah. And so there were, this discussion and this thread about oil, it really started to get like heated and it started to get nasty. And it's like, okay, wait, hold on. Like a healthy debate is possible and it's good and it can happen when we are able to like not get like when we're not taking it personally, right? Yeah. And when we're staying curious instead of like being defensive, and so there's a way to do that, but I think that that's not something that people really learn, and I think that's a skill to be able to do that.
It is. And most definitely, actually, when I was getting my doctorate, I've taken philosophy many times, but in every philosophy class I had, we had to learn how to argue and how to have healthy debate. And it was actually a skill we worked on every single week. And then we had to go on and get up in front of the class and argue a belief that we didn't believe in.
Oh, that's so powerful.
Now that's powerful. If you've never argued for something that you are opposed to, you really haven't seen the other side of how to argue like that.
And that could be quite scary because that in itself is probably going to in some way change a belief that you have.
Right.
Because we think that we know, but do we really? Until we get into the nitty gritty and really start to learn about it. And so that's a powerful thing. I'm sure that you learned a lot from that class.
I gained a lot from it. And it made me calm when I got into conflict because I was like, okay, if, I don't want to get super emotional about this and start saying things that I will regret. I never want to get into that. I just want to be very logical about it. I want to get, my point across, but I want to be respectful about it. And I think when you practice, like you said, it's a skill. When you practice it over and over again, it gets easier. It gets a lot easier to not get worked up about stuff.
And to not be always reacting to things, right?
Yeah.
But the base of it, I think, is the understanding that like ultimately we're responsible for how we feel.
Yeah.
Like we can't ever like when we give that power away to like, okay, I'm feeling this because of something you said. First of all, it's not true because we can't, like, we ultimately are responsible for the thoughts that we have about whatever somebody says, but also then like you're totally giving away that agency and that power to somebody. And so when we can like step back and take responsibility for how we feel, it's a lot easier to like the guard goes down. And if you're not trying to protect your feelings, when you know that like you are in charge, and so there's no need to protect them, then it's like, okay, now I'm open to like some debate, knowing that you can't like hurt me. Right?
Yeah. You kind of gain these levels of like, you're doing a martial art and you're gaining levels and belts, and you get higher and higher and more proficient. You could walk into a den of really nasty things and be like, I mean, it's okay. I mean,
Totally.
it's like,
Totally.
it's okay, and it angers people when you're not like that too. I
Yes.
find that too. They're like, I want you to be angry with me. I'm like, I'm just not going to do it.
Totally. Like my wife, Luann, she's fiery. She's
Mhm.
fiery. She has like a lot of opinions. She's very like, she's quick to like kind of rile up, and she's
Yeah.
passionate. And there are times when if I had $1 for every time she said this in our 13-year relationship, it's like, I'm pissed off that you're not pissed off. Like I'm upset that you're not upset.
Exactly.
And it's true though. But once you have that understanding, it is like, it's been a really important skill for me to have because of our community, and being able to kind of like, being the face of our brand, and kind of like being this person who's able to like, have there be room for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
And that was a skill that I've gained over the past year, the past, like, well, we've been doing this since like 2014. So,
Yeah.
but it takes practice for sure.
It does take practice.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, Molly, this has been awesome. I mean, very enlightening conversation.
It's been so good. I've had the
Yeah.
best time.
Yeah. I just enjoy meeting new people, learning about them, and just meeting like we're two strangers meeting and learning about each other, about the things we care about, and being curious. That's the best.
That's the best. It's like life is so magical, right? When you're
Yeah.
open to it, it's like, I don't know, just stumble across people you have an awesome talk with, and it's like, my life is richer now. It's so good.
Yeah. It's like you
Yeah.
gain something in that time. It's like, oh, I've now armed myself with something else that will hopefully make me better and go out there and be better to other people,
Yeah.
So
I
thank
love
you
it.
for that.
Thank you. It's been amazing. I've had such a good time chatting with you. Thank you for having me on and for sharing your space.
It's totally my pleasure. Molly Patrick, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.